Welcome to Live Backwards, where we live backwards by taking a retrospective glance at depictions of the evils haunting society moving forwards. I'm your host, Alan Rickdale, and this week we're going to be talking about the theme of evil in film, specifically who or what is the most evil character in cinema. Here to discuss this with us today is expert Dr. Cornelius T. McGuffin, cultural and critical theorist from Oxford University. How are you doing today, Mr. McGuffin?
Oh, I'm fine, enjoying the weather. Got a bit of a backache, but can't complain. I'm okay. I'm 72, I'm okay.
So, Dr. McGuffin.
Please, call me Cornelius.
Cornelius. In your expert opinion, what would you say, or who would you say, is the most evil character in all of cinema?
Well, to begin answering this question, we must first assess the various methodologies with which one can analyze evil as a cultural phenomenon. Evil as we know it has many faces. We understand murder, genocide, torture, and deception all to be patently evil. However, the veracity of such claims depends upon the framework with which we use, for evil can be defined theologically, philosophically, spiritually, and even in some ways scientifically. Evil as beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
What are the various ways that we can assess said evils?
Well, firstly, let's explore humanity's oldest explanation of evil, which is theologically based. From early pagan religions on to Christianity, evil has consistently been described as a supernatural force existing without the boundaries of basic human experience. It is inherently spiritual in nature and is often embodied by a unique figure such as the Dark Lord Lucifer in Christianity and Judaism. By this moral compass, the answer to your initial question regarding the utmost evil would be any portrayal of Satan, with other nefarious and or demonic forces coming second. Films such as The Exorcist, The Omen, and Drag Me to Hell come to mind. However, theological evil can also manifest itself as a very human product, such as the Buddhist belief that all suffering stems from basic human desire. According to this definition, I can imagine no greater villain than Glenn Close's character Alex Forrest in Fatal Attraction, whose lustful, greedy desires deign her own downfall.
So by this logic, any film depicting Satan would technically, according to the theological stance on evil, be the most evil character. Satan. He would be the most evil character in that respect. Is this correct in your assessment?
Yes, I
Okay.
must say so.
Now, so what are the other potential moral barometers with which we could gauge the magnitude of evil of film characters? I'm curious to see what your opinion is.
Well, while the supernatural portrayal of evil has historically been the prevailing one, it nonetheless proves inadequate for a complete understanding of the matter. For greater depth, we must embark upon philosophic inquiry. During the 18th century, two ethical frameworks arose in which we can use today. The first is known as utilitarianism, which founder Jeremy Bentham defines as an ethical system in which the happiness of the greatest number of people in a given society is considered the greatest good.
Interesting.
Mhm. The corollary being the greatest suffering equals the greatest evils. Now, to answer your question based on this belief, one must immediately perform a calculus of evil with regard to all film. What villains threaten the greatest number of humans? Which does the most harm? These are questions to ask. Well, Darth Vader contends for his destruction of the entire planet of Alderaan, as do the civilization-devouring Borg Collective from Star Trek First Contact.
Interesting.
Mhm. In fact, any Earth-threatening entities, such as the extraterrestrials from War of the Worlds or Invasion of the Body Snatchers, or They Live, top the evil charts in terms of their destructiveness. The viruses from Contagion, 28 Days Later, and The Happening could also be deemed similarly evil, yet they wreak havoc with no intention, which brings me to the next point.
Okay, no, go on, go on.
While ultimate harm done functions as a fair determinant of moral standing, it is not enough to analyze every component of evil as pertaining to cinema. For one key factor remains outside this formulation, that of intention. According to German philosopher Immanuel Kant, ethics abides by a principle known as the categorical imperative, which states that one should act only according to the maxim whereby you can, at the same time, will that it should become a universal law. In other words, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Unlike utilitarianism, the ends here do not in fact justify the means. For this reason, we ask, why do movie characters do what they do? As we answer, we see more recognizable movie villains coming out of the woodwork.
Okay, I can see that. Who'd you have in mind?
Well, any villain whose intentions are not primarily selfish, but necessarily harmful to others. Grisly slasher villains whose sole desire is to kill, such as Freddy Krueger from Nightmare on Elm Street and Michael Myers from Halloween, come to mind. However, their supernatural predispositions give way to potential excuses for their actions. Instead, the power-hungry and sadistic come to mind, conjuring up chilling images of the very violent Alex Lange from A Clockwork Orange, and more poignantly, serial killer Hannibal the Cannibal Lecter from Silence of the Lambs, who appears entirely unemotional and self-serving. To me, his motivations place him among the most evil of villains.
It's actually funny you say that. Not only did I watch it the other day, but a fun fact, Hannibal Lecter was only on screen for a mere 14 minutes during that performance. A performance which deeply ingrained itself in the memories of audiences forever. Anyway, AFI also includes Hannibal Lecter as the #1 movie villain of all time. I find that your estimation is very accurate, Dr. McGuffin. We actually have a clip here of one of those few moments of his 14 minutes. Let's take a look.
I myself cannot. You use Evian skin cream. And sometimes you wear lead at home. But not today.
Chilling indeed. As we can see, Lecter is a fully incarnate manifestation of evil as we generally understand it. Cold, callous, manipulative, deceitful, sadistic, selfish, violent, and exploitative. Aside from his intellectual prowess, he encapsulates everything repulsive in human nature. Paradoxically, however, for all his maleficence, Lecter somehow still manages to fascinate, almost entrance us, probing into the deepest depths of our psyches, fishing out the most morbid of curiosities. Because he nearly seduces the viewer with his charisma into empathizing with him, so nearly, Lecter stands as one of the most evil characters in film, doubtlessly. For he tempts us to ignore the darkest aspects of his being and subsequently our own.
Indeed.
To put it in psychological terms, Lecter is the perfect psychopath, unempathetic, calculating, sadistic, and even charming. He's the archetype of human evil as we know it today. However, his traits are but depictions of common human tendencies. Humans have historically been their worst enemy. From pervasive war, as seen in Apocalypse Now, to nuclear warfare, as depicted in Doctor Strangelove, to climate change, shown in The Day After Tomorrow, humanity is often the reaper of its own destruction. Whether it is through the banality of evil, as Hannah Arendt, philosopher and human rights activist, describes it, whereby evil acts are allowed to happen by passers-by, passive, or the decisive act to destroy, as in warmongering. Ultimately, human nature finds itself as the source of the very ills it attempts to overcome. And it is here we bridge the gap back to theology, where we find the 7 deadly sins.
Greed, for lack of a better word, is good.
Yes, however, evil in this light becomes very hard to estimate, for no qualitative metrics exist for approximating the potential magnitude of, say, sloth. To reconcile this dilemma, we must utilize what is known as moral relativism, which states that moral judgments exist only in as far as the context of human discourse, and thus can only be reached from a perspectivist viewpoint, or, in other words, from an individually or culturally unique perspective. Therefore, no absolute judgments exist, nor absolute evil. In this framework, I cannot give you an answer to your initial question, yet I can tell you that evil, spook or not, depends entirely
Indeed.
on your perspective of things. And because humanity is entrenched in its own conventions, norms, and way of seeing things, evil, from a human perspective, is necessarily that which threatens our very existence. And interestingly enough, one could argue that every villain named thus far, whether individually responsible or as a symptom of a larger problem, is equally threatening to human existence, based on the idea that human nature is very often the seed of our own becomings. Very interesting, Professor. So I suppose that based on what you're saying, at the end of the day, our own worst enemy is, in fact, ourselves. Some very profound stuff. Well, I just want to add on one thing. Based on all the things that you've concluded across the span of this interview, I can't help but think that the greatest movie villain is actually from a kids movie, placed number 20 on AFI's list, and it's the man who kills Bambi's mother. Because to me, he represents all of the potential evils and threats and harms embodied by man, him or herself.
Thank you very much for joining us
please,
today.
the pleasure was all mine.
Dr. McGuffin, it was a very, very large pleasure.
Oh, no, thank
I hope
you.
you'll join us again another time.
Of course.
Thank you.
Well, that concludes our time for today, everybody. Thank you for coming, and please subscribe, and I'll see you next. Come back next week. Oh my God, where am I? What happened?
Andreas, are you okay? You've been yelling in your sleep.
I don't know, dude. I had the weirdest dream, man. That I had a talk show and I was interviewing Carl or Kat.
Carl's been dead for 3 years.
It was all a dream. No, it wasn't. And that's why bad writing is the greatest evil in film ever.